booked and then come take my hand. We're rebels with a paperback plan.
Welcome, listeners, to Booked and Banned, the podcast, where we discuss essential literature that has faced challenges and censorship. Our book for this episode is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. Our guest this week is my roommate from an exchange year in Japan, Crissy. Welcome to the show. Please tell our listeners a little bit about who you are.
Okay, my name is Crissy Ladner. I live in the Detroit area in Michigan. I'm currently a Japanese teacher in high school, and I have a master's degree from University of Michigan in journalism, and my undergrad was in political science, Asian studies. Love Japan, love reading, love politics, and very happy to discuss this book, which is one I read in middle school.
And I guess I should say we were at Seinan Gakuin University in Fukuoka in Japan for a year. It was fantastic.
Absolutely.
Well, let me give a little bit of background about the novel. Before it was the beloved novel we know today, this story first captivated readers as a short story in the April 1959 issue of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. That original version was so impactful, it won the Hugo Award and remains one of the most frequently anthologized pieces of short fiction to date. Recognizing there was more to Charlie's journey, Keyes expanded the work into a full-length novel in 1966, which subsequently took home the Nebula Award. The story is told through the progress reports of Charlie Gordon, a man with an intellectual disability who undergoes an experimental surgery to raise his IQ to genius levels. As Charlie's intelligence skyrockets, he surpasses the scientists who created him, but he soon discovers that genius comes with a profound sense of isolation. It is a story about the mouse, Algernon, the person, and the perhaps fragile nature of the human mind. Before we begin our discussion, I want to address the language used within the book. Because Daniel Keyes wrote the story in the late 1950s and 60s, he uses terms like retarded and moron, and I'm putting those in quotation marks. Words that were considered clinical or common at the time. Today, we recognize these terms as outdated and offensive. In our conversation today, we will use more modern terminology. However, it's worth noting that the presence of those words in the novel serves as a historical reminder of how society viewed and categorized people with intellectual disabilities during that era. Hearing those terms through Charlie's own reports helps us feel the stigma he was enmeshed in. Despite being a staple of American literature, Flowers for Algernon has a long, contentious history with censorship. From 1996 to 2005, the book consistently hovered in the middle of the American Library Association's top 100 most challenged books list. The primary reasons for the challenge is that it's rarely for its central premise, which are medical ethics. Instead, censors typically target specific scenes that occur as Charlie's intelligence and his hormones develop. The four main reasons cited by challengers are explicit content. As Charlie becomes more intelligent, he begins to explore his sexuality. Censors often label these descriptions as pornographic or too mature for the junior high and high school students who are typically assigned the book. Profanity. The book contains various curse words that reflect the gritty reality of Charlie's environment. Religious objections. Some groups have argued that the story promotes a, quote, secular humanist, unquote, worldview, or that the surgery itself is an act of, quote, playing God, unquote. Outdated terms. In the 90s and 80s, the term retarded and moron were not a primary reason for bans because they were part of common usage. These terms are now frequently cited under the, quote, offensive language or insensitive content, unquote, labels. Modern parents and educators sometimes challenge the book because they feel these terms, even in a historical context, are harmful to students with intellectual disabilities. This has led some schools to alter the text or to remove it from the curriculum entirely, rather than use it as a teaching moment about the history of disability rights. Critics and educators often point out the deep irony in banning this book. The novel's central theme is the importance of empathy and the right to education for everyone. Daniel Keyes used these now outdated terms specifically to show how dehumanized Charlie was by the people around him. By removing the book, censors are effectively silencing Charlie Gordon's plea for his own humanity, the very thing the novel warns us against. So, with that context, let's jump into the discussion. To start things off, Flowers for Algernon is a deeply emotional and intellectually challenging book. I had read the short story in high school, but this was my first time reading the novel. What was it about Charlie's journey that resonated with you the most, and why did you choose this novel?
I love this novel because as an empath, I empathize with his struggle for dignity. As an adult, he, once he gained his cognitive abilities, he was able to look back and say, well, wait a minute, those people were not respecting me at all. And then at that point, once he had his intellect, he felt degraded and he felt terrible about himself. And then he struggled and he realized the scientist, he was part of an experiment. He knew that all along, but he struggled with look, I'm not just a lab rat. And then he also felt the same way about Algernon, the lab rat, the literal lab rat. He felt the same way, like this is actually a living, breathing being. And so am I. So the struggle for dignity while he's undergoing this experimental experiment was the part that just made my heart palpitate. And I felt for him and his struggle for dignity. Also, the quest for happiness. What is happiness and how do you achieve it? And what is success and happiness? And are they these measurable things or is it something else? So these are reasons that really drew me to Charlie's journey.
That's amazing. I had no idea that it had become a full-length novel. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to read it more fully and to delve into it. As we read Charlie's progress reports, we see his spelling, grammar, and complexity of thought evolve over a short amount of time. How did this narrative style affect your empathy for him? Does being inside his head make the eventual quote-unquote regression feel like a personal loss for the reader rather than just a medical event?
Yes, I feel like this was the only way to tell the story. It was just the right way to tell the story. Because Charlie, when he's increasing in his cognitive ability and his intelligence, we can see his writing improve, his, word choice improve, his, all those things you want for your children. You're like, oh, hey, they're learning so much. And you get excited about that. And then when it's regressing, he sort of realizes it, but sort of doesn't. But the reader deeply feels it. The reader's like, oh no. And they wove it in such a way where it didn't seem so blatant. It was very gradual. And he still had complex thoughts and he still had complex emotions the whole way through. It's just his ability, wording, his word choice to express them was different. And of course, the spelling. And you're like, well, this is the same person throughout. This is the exact same person. And as a teacher, I'm like, okay, here's a kid who has spelling errors and can't put a sentence together. And here's a kid who's highly intelligent. They're both people. They're both worthy. So I really felt seeing him be the same person in his heart the whole time, although his focus changed throughout his journey. I felt like it was the only way to tell the story and have the reader be along for the ride so intimately.
I think you're right. And I also think that even when his thoughts were simpler, his emotions were still complex.
Yes.
Even if you have to express them in a simple way. And this is a total sidebar, but do you remember we had a conversation when we were exchange students and I was complaining that I didn't have enough facility with the language to express all these complexities about, things I wanted to say. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it. And
Yes.
what you said to me was a child may not have all the vocabulary to express their emotion, but you still know what they're feeling, even though they might express it in a very simple way. And I've always remembered that. That was
Wow.
very wise. You know, and you were what, 21 years old? That was amazing.
I was not a wise person, but yeah, children have this like emotional intelligence that is there and it continues throughout their life. It might change, but they are these feeling human creatures. They don't have words yet, but they have the feelings. They have all these emotions. So
Yeah.
it is frustrating. That's the most frustrating thing about learning a language. I'm a language teacher, as I mentioned, is my students are like, we have pen pals, right? And they're like, I have too many thoughts. I can't, I don't have the vocabulary yet. I'm like, okay, sit first. Let's simplify it. Okay. You want to say all this, but let's take away the flowery language and just get to the point, because they just want to chat GPT their whole letter, but they just need to set it aside and just use the words that you do have first and then add to it as you go along. So Charlie's using the words that he does have and still expressing sadness or loss, grief, regret, and also some happiness and feeling that people are kind and, expressing nice things as well as painful things. So, yeah, it felt very raw to hear it in simple language. So it felt good to read it that way.
Yeah, it was very authentic, I think.
Yes, it felt good.
A recurring theme is that the scientists, Dr. Nimmer and Dr. Strauss, and I don't know if I'm saying Nimmer right, they did not view Charlie as a human being before the surgery. They felt they created him, and Charlie's surgery was a fictional attempt to, quote, cure, unquote, what was then seen as a medical deficiency. Today, the rise of the neurodiversity movement and rapid advancements in technologies like CRISPR gene editing and neural implants, we have those things coming to bear. Looking at our current world, what do you think Charlie's story tells us about the ethics of trying to medically, quote, fix, unquote, people who are cognitively or neurologically different? Was the experiment an act of scientific hubris? Are we still at risk of prioritizing a medical standard over a person's inherent humanity?
I feel like this is happening today. And we just don't even see the trajectory. The ethics of trying to medically fix people that aren't broken is crazy. So to me, but Charlie's surgery shows how, like, this scientific ideal of, like, okay, a super intelligent person, that's what we want, right? That can lead to valuing measurable traits in your test scores over empathy and character. And I tell my students all the time, look, when I give the don't cheat speech, say, look, this quiz is not going with you forever. Your moral character goes with you forever. Just because you're going to have, an A++ and an extra point for an AP class. If you cheat your way through that, you might score super high as far as like perceived intelligence. But is your moral character, oh, why are you trying to achieve this? Like, why are you trying to look intelligent? Who cares? You're a good person. You cheat on a test, you are dinging at your moral fiber. And that is what stays with you forever. This quiz score on my Japanese test, no one's going to care about that in 20 years. Don't cheat. So, are you going to cheat in relationships? Or you going to lie to your friends? Your moral character and being a good person is going to stick with me as my memory of you and stick with you as who you are. So, fixing people to be more intelligent is not even what we need to be focused on. So, having these measurable traits as the focus is, I see a huge, huge downside of that. And also, the doctors treated him as their experiment, like, yay, we get to make this perfect person. And that's their perception of perfect. And who decides what's perfect? Who decides what is the fix? What is the goal of fixing someone? There are the deaf community. Eventually, we're going to be able to choose an embryo that's not deaf, right? Deaf can be partially genetic. So, okay, I'm going to pick this embryo over that one. Like, what? Deaf people usually don't want to be fixed because they're like, I'm not broken. We are thriving. We have a full language. We are fine. Stop trying to fix us. And the same with people with Down syndrome. We get that you've had babies like they're like, oh, time for your amniocentesis to I'm like, well, what is this for anyway? They're like, well, it detects markers for Down syndrome pretty accurately. Well, what is the point? Like, I want to have a baby, right? I'm pregnant and this is not about abortion. This is about selection. So I had a huge problem with that because that is like tiptoeing into selecting my baby. Sorry, I'm going off on eugenics. So trying to medically fix people is a huge problem today. And we don't even really see it. The CRISPR technologies, neural implants, like choosing your embryo based on sex, biological sex, you could totally do that. In India, they have laws against that because they're like, you know, people are getting abortions because it's a female and not a male. We're like, that's terrible. But if it's IVF, like you're picking, you're picking like, okay, girls over boys or boys over girls. We have a huge moral dilemma when it's someone else, but we don't have a huge moral dilemma when it's right here. It's happening here. You can literally do that now. So I feel like this book can start such a discussion with young people about that. People who are my age, we're not teachable, right? So the young people, they have to be the thinkers. They have to start to wrestle with these ethical issues. And it's not a bad thing. You can't throw away the baby with the bathwater and just throw this book away just because of a few things you don't like. It's still valuable, the message that you can bring up, the issues that you can start to talk about are here, and they're so good and they're so well done. So, and it's a great journey of a book.
I think you're right that it's an entree into discussion of medical ethics, of whether do we want to have designer babies or not? How much are we already doing some sort of selection? For example, in societies that value male children over female children, are we selecting for that? So I think that all of that is still relevant today, and this book is a great entry into that.
The current things that we're finding out about Epstein, he was wanting to pass on his DNA. He wasn't wanting to raise children. He was wanting to pass on DNA and like selecting for that. And he had intellectuals talk to him about genetics and stuff. So I was like, well, what was he up to? It just reeks of eugenics today in a really large scale way. And we don't really know how much was done by him because we don't know all the information.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was choosing who was superior, him. Okay, if that's not an example of morals are more important than, I don't know, what features he wanted or color hair or genetics or intelligence. I mean, if that's not the perfect example of morals are more important, being a good person is more important, I don't know what is. Our focus needs to be on like, okay, raising a loving home or just like love the people who are already here and don't try to pick for certain traits just so we can
Yeah.
so many ethical concerns. Like when it's anyway, sorry. I can go on and on about that.
It's okay. So Algernon is the only creature who truly shares Charlie's experience. Why do you think Daniel Keyes chose a mouse as Charlie's primary companion and his quote mirror unquote? What does it say about Charlie's isolation that his deepest bond is with a lab animal rather than a human?
Well, we've naturally form a bond with people who are going through something that we went through, like with siblings. There's some kind of bond, like we have the same parent, we went through similar things, like roommates. We're like, oh, you remember that? It's almost like we don't have to talk. On some level, we just deeply understand each other. So Charlie and Algernon were going through the same thing. So I think it was, of course, the metaphor of like he's a lab rat. Well, here's an actual lab rat. It wasn't even a metaphor. It was just real. Lab rats are bought by the case and used in experiments and some of it's very worthy causes, but Charlie was also a lab rat, so I felt like his empathy, he just had to steal Algernon from the lab and just like take him home and just care for him and sorry, you're not going to be part of this experiment anymore, but I'm just keeping you because um for one thing, we understand each other. And another thing, Charlie was a bit isolated, especially when his cognitive ability went up. He suddenly would make people angry. They're like kind of steered away from him a little bit. He didn't have the emotional intelligence developed over the years to navigate social situations. So he turned to the mouse for like some actual comfort. It kind of shows intelligence doesn't automatically create meaningful human relationships, and they can't be engineered, right? The actual human connection, or in this case, the actual connection, it just kind of has to come naturally. And also the lab rat, Algernon's fate, spoiler alert, he dies. He dies at the end. And so Charlie's like, I'm going to die too. He had the intelligence to calculate his rate of decline and everything like that. So it was just kind of sad at the end when he came to understand that.
But he still wanted Alice to leave flowers for Algernon on Algernon's grave, where he was kind of buried in a backyard of a New York City apartment building. I found that very poignant, the flowers, because it's the title, but it's also he wanted someone to remember Algernon, but also to remember him.
Exactly.
But Algernon is the proxy, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Being as naive as he was in his less intelligent state, you sort of think people are good when they're not. So he would have thought that someone would leave. I don't know why I'm crying about this. So he would think that someone would leave flowers for him, but would somebody, you know? So it's the empath, and maybe something in him knew that no one's going to leave flowers for him. I can't even speak.
Take your time. It's okay. I've seen you cry.
So something that's important is that Charlie's taking care of Algernon even after his death, and just kind of showing his love. And will someone take care of Charlie that way when Charlie dies? We don't know. Are humans reliable enough to do that? I don't know. He had a mother and a sister, and maybe they would take care of him, and a father too. Maybe they would take care of him, put flowers on his grave, or remember him in a kind way. But Charlie just automatically would have that kind of kindness and remembering Algernon in a kind way. He just does that naturally.
Charlie was definitely a naturally kind person. And you see that especially more toward the beginning, where his cognitive ability had not ramped up yet.
Right.
And he thinks everybody at work is his friend,
Yes.
when a lot of times they're making fun of him, and some are and some aren't.
Right.
And I think they do eventually become his friends. But then once he gets to a certain level of cognitive ability and the emotional intelligence still has not quite caught up, he
Yes.
does tend to alienate others. So it is questionable whether his family, who had been apart from him for so long and had
Right.
institutionalized him, whether they would remember him, and probably not. It is really sad. I cried at the end of the novel. There's a lot there. But once again, it goes back to these are very complex emotions. And this was a complex situation, but it was a human one.
Right. One thing that struck me later, because of one of the reasons it was banned, because there's some explicit things in there. He says he slept with this girl. He said he couldn't sleep with the girl he actually had true feelings for. So he couldn't have a healthy relationship. And it also dives into his childhood trauma, which it's implied that that childhood trauma is keeping him from having a healthy relationship, but steering him more towards meaningless hookups, meaningless sex. And it's very apparent in the book that it's not good for him. It's unhealthy for both parties. So that's another topic that is so good for teenagers as they go into their adulthood. Think about that. Why can't he have a meaningful relationship? Why can't he gravitate towards something that's healthy for him in a relationship? And it's trauma he hasn't dealt with. When he was lower in his cognitive ability, he just kind of followed instructions, right? Don't go around girls. But he didn't understand why. He just had that just kind of cue and response, right? But when he becomes more intelligent, he can't figure it out himself. But then he eventually does start to deal with some of his childhood trauma and start to understand it more. And I felt like that was a really good piece of this story, not only because it makes him a more full character and you kind of understand his background and what happened in his life and understand that no one's life is perfect and not just one thing happens to you, right? You have a whole life of different experiences, good and bad, and broken relationships, prepared relationships, and that deals with that too. But the dealing with your trauma, I felt like that's a great issue for teenagers. Really good issue. So if that's something that can come up in a classroom, that's so healthy for young people to start thinking about because they're going to get in their 30s and go, okay, why am I not, why can't I, why am I pushing healthy people away
Right.
in my relationships? It's because some people do that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people do that. If
A lot of people
the dating apps are any indicator of what
think the
goes
hookups are
on. Yeah.
meaningless.
Yeah.
And
So,
why do some people crave that? And why did he like just gravitate towards that? You know what? So it's a good issue to talk about for teens too. So
yeah,
yeah.
especially teens. At one point, Charlie realizes that his intellectual growth has far outpaced his emotional development, which we've already touched on to a great extent. Though Alice recognizes this from the beginning, she realizes it. He has the IQ of a genius, but the emotional age of someone who has never learned how to navigate love or conflict. His childhood was also fraught with abuse and mixed messages from his family. Sometimes his mother is like, oh, he's going to be okay, but other times she's trying to push him. Through the lens of Charlie's struggle, how does the book dismantle the idea of, quote, being smart, unquote, as the ultimate solution to Charlie's problems that he thinks it will be?
Well, the surgery or the experiment was just about intellect. And intellect cannot create emotional intelligence. It just is seemingly not even connected. You can logically learn about emotions, but there are some people who are maybe not intelligent, who are very emotionally intelligent and in tune with people and the good friend that kind of makes you feel warm. And they just know how to do that. And they know how to just be loving. Um, I forget your question. Oh, how's being smart the solution? Okay. So Charlie's emotional maturity lags. Alice knew that was going to happen, and he started to see it as well. And that's okay, but it sort of puts into perspective, are these really two separate things? Completely separate things? And if you think about people you know, okay, that person is very smart, but they don't even know how to mingle at a party or start a conversation. But some people, they dropped out of high school, but they can finagle their way to a managerial position. Just they're sweet or they just have some kind of magic or charm or something. They know how people work. They understand all these nuances of society that are kind of mysterious to other people. So it's worthy of a discussion of is emotional intelligence and intellect, are they two completely separate things or do they overlap? I think being smart isn't the solution for most things in life. There are other areas where strengths are so valuable.
Right, right. So Charlie's story ends on a hauntingly quiet note with his request to put flowers on Algernon's grave. And as we wrap up our discussion, what is the core message or insight you hope our listeners carry with them from the novel?
What are your goals? Think about what do you really want out of life and for your children? Do you want a high SAT score? I mean, that's wonderful, but putting that into perspective of what is actual happiness made of? And what is that made of for you? Or would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? And I heard that in a really bad context, someone who was not happy and ended up very disturbed. But if we push society to only value intelligence and just picking and choosing according to things that aren't actually a measure of your happiness in the future or your feeling of success in the future. I don't think we should pick that for our offspring and for ourselves either. We should look a lot deeper than just those measurable things. If you have some measurable gift, if you have intelligence, that's a gift. Use it in good ways, of course. But it's one gift. No, it's one gift.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me about this book and so many other things that the book brings up. Our next episode will be a discussion of Beloved by Toni Morrison. And I'm going to end the episode with what has become kind of the little catchphrase. To quote Isaac Asimov, any book worth banning is a book worth reading. Thank you.
Booked and banned and bound by pages, stories hiding through the ages, whispered truths that still ring clear for those who choose to listen.